Families and Their Cultural Differences by Nicole Lobdell. Family roles. Every member of a family has a specific role. This role could be anything from cleaning to making important decisions. These roles are what keeps the family running smoothly. Children are typically responsible for earning good grades and doing their chores. In some cultures, however, children have as much responsibility as their parents and are treated as adults. Mothers and fathers are responsible for providing for the family and keeping everything in order. Responsibility is typically shared, but some cultures favor men over women or women over men. Cultural family differences. Every culture has a different definition of family. What is considered normal to one culture may be completely insulting to another, and each holds its own customs. Each culture has different roles for each family member. Children are the cornerstones of families. In some cultures, children are considered sacred, and in other cultures, children are uncommon. Having children is something a lot of people take for granted because it is so common in our society. So what defines a family? By definition, a family is any couple that has at least one child. The typical American family has at least 2 children. Other cultures, however, have more or less children depending on their cultural views. A family is any group of people that share ideas with each other and make decisions together. Families confide in each other and care unconditionally for each other. Many cultures favor large families because of the support system that a big family provides. Egyptian family life. In Egypt, families are extremely valuable. A family that does not have a child is considered to be cursed or unlucky. Adoption is rare but necessary in order to maintain high social status. Children are the most important elements of the Egyptian cultures, and if a family cannot have children, they will ask their gods and goddesses for help. Children are expected to care for their parents until death, where they receive their inheritance. Women and men share equal responsibilities and even punishments. Women are allowed to own land, go on trial, and even file for divorce. Couples that are divorced in the Egyptian culture have very low social status. Divorces are only acceptable if the husband has been unfaithful. Divorces are not common and are extremely discouraged within this society. Women and children are the most important elements of this culture. Women are treated like royalty and often have servants to take care of their homes and children. Women have equal responsibility to men and often rule alongside them in this society. So the Egyptian family life versus American family life. In the Egyptian culture, they valued children because they are sacred. They value women and treat them as royalty. Adoption is rare. Children are expected to care for their parents and learn how to rule the culture. Girls receive material things such as jewelry and clothing, while boys are taught inheritance rights and how to rule the land. Education is extremely important for boys and not as much for girls because they do not have as many responsibilities. Girls are homeschooled, while boys are sent to public school beginning at age 7. American culture is a lot different. Children are common and often taken for granted. Women have many responsibilities and expectations. Women are expected to work as much or more than men. Women are often overlooked and are not seen as the dominant members of the family. Adoption is common and the birth rate is high. Children do not have a lot of expectations. A lot of children take things for granted and do not realize how little they actually have to do compared to what children in other cultures are required to do. Education is shared equally between boys and girls. Japanese family life. The Japanese value family life and have a saying that says, even if an extended family does not live together, parents and grandparents should live near enough to carry over a bowl of hot soup. Extended families are favored over smaller families. The Japanese remain a strong culture through their family connections. They base everything around the family, and no decisions are made unless all members of the family are made aware. The men are seen as head of the family, and all their needs must be tended to first. The wives are expected to look after their husbands and keep the children under control. Sons are valued over daughters and are given more opportunities within the family. Sons are expected to take over for their fathers, and if there are no sons in the family, they will adopt a son. Daughters are never allowed to be head of the household. Japanese life versus American. In the Japanese culture, children go to school 6 to 7 times a week, and education is highly valued. It is not uncommon for a child to live with their parents through adulthood or until marriage. Sons are favored over daughters. Men come first, and women must tend to all their needs before their own. Many women choose not to have children, and as a result, Japan has a very low birth rate. Families with children are valued over those that do not have children because it is rare for a couple to have a child. Women are permitted to work, but many choose to quit their jobs in order to raise children and will continue the jobs after the child grows up. Women rarely hold high positions for this reason. In the American culture, children go to school 5 times a week and education is often overlooked. Typically, children go out on their own before marriage during the college years. Some children live at home, but not very often. Sons and daughters are treated equally. Men and women have equal rights, and men are not favored over women. America has a very high birth rate, and women are more commonly choose to have children than to not have children. The typical American family has at least 2 children. Women typically have jobs and keep those jobs. Women go on a maternity leave instead of quitting their jobs entirely. Some women choose to be housewives instead of holding a job in order to care for their families. The feminist approach. The theoretical approach of feminism applies to both these cultures because their views on women. In the Egyptian culture, women are valued and treated equally to men, and in the Japanese culture, women are less important than men and are seen as caretakers and not providers. Women in the Egyptian culture have more rights than women in Japanese culture. They are allowed to work, own land, and make important decisions without the consult of their husbands. In many ways, the Egyptian women are much more valued than the Egyptian men. They are treated as sacred rather than as servants and housewives. Japanese women are becoming more involved in their culture, but in traditional times they were to be seen and not heard, and only the man's opinion mattered in their society. Egyptian women are essential in holding the culture together. The women in Egyptian culture are much more functional than the men because they are the caretakers. Women in this culture have a lot more roles than men and are expected to look after the children, work in stalls during the day, and dictate a lot of tasks for their husbands. Women in the Egyptian culture are often more valuable than men because they have more responsibilities within the culture. Women are treated like royalty in this culture and are just as sacred as children to the Egyptians. In the Japanese culture, however, women have much less responsibility than men. Men are favored over women because they are stronger, work harder, and have more schooling. Women have a lot of roles within this culture, but they are primarily in the home. A typical day for a Japanese woman would consist of caring for the children, cleaning the house, and cooking dinner, taking care of their husbands, and homeschooling the children. Some Japanese women hold jobs, but often are not given the same job opportunities as men. Compared to Americans, both these cultures have a lot of expectations and standards to follow. In America, women are not expected to do everything. The work is evenly distributed between men and women. American women also are not expected to be servants or housewives. They have many freedoms such as having a job and freedom of speech. The concept of family in America is not as valued as it is in the Egyptian and Japanese cultures. Having children is not uncommon in the American society. Americans value money and material things, whereas Japanese and Egyptians value their families and relationships over material possessions. The concept of family is somewhat lost in America, and although there are some families that are close, there are millions of others that are not. Americans have very different views on life and values than the Egyptians or Japanese have. Families are taken for granted in America, whereas in other cultures, family is all their culture has. Americans as a whole are very selfish, and they do not realize what they have, because they constantly want to complain about what they do not have. Other cultures would love to have the same freedoms and material possessions that Americans have, but since they do not, their families become a critical part in keeping their cultures strong. Why family is important. Families are a critical part in any culture. Families bring people together, support each other, and ultimately keep a culture strong. Without the support of families, many cultures would not even exist. Cultures rely on family support to communicate ideas, keep relationships strong, support each other through hard times, and make important decisions. People often take their families for granted, but when something goes wrong, they rely on their families to get them through the difficult times. In cultures like the Japanese, family is all they have to keep them strong. Egyptian culture families are considered very sacred, and close family relationships are very important to the Egyptians. Americans could learn a lot from the Japanese and the Egyptians because of their outlook on life. They are not constantly worried about themselves. They like to help others and improve their own cultures through the relationships they share. Families are the building blocks in keeping cultures strong. Without families, cultures would fail within a few years. Conclusions. Every culture has a family connection. Without families, cultures could not survive or prosper. The concept of family is often different when comparing cultures and their beliefs. The Egyptians and the Japanese have very strong family bonds, and the concept of kinship applies to both of them. Americans could learn a lot from studying how other cultures live because it would help them to not take everything for granted. Children are often overlooked in our society, but in societies like the Egyptians, children are their greatest blessing. Women's role has changed greatly since the early times, and now the women have just as many rights as men. Each culture has a different view on families, but there is always some kind of family relationship, good and bad, in every culture around the world. A culture could not exist without families, and a culture cannot grow and develop without everyone's support. Families are what make the world unique. Here's the credits. Thank you for watching.